Hello, everyone. Let us start with another segment on Indian National Congress. Today, we are going to discuss about economic critique of colonialism that the leadership of the Indian National Congress provided. This is Parvez Alam from Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, and we are in the MOOC SWAM course on Nationalism and Constitutional Growth in India, 1858 to 1920. Friends, in many of the lectures, I have been talking about that economics was one of the very important factor, and especially when we talk about colonialism. Colonialism is an ideology which functions in the domain of political control and economic exploitation. And it was this economic exploitation of India where either British East India Company or later on British Empire or British Raj, which was engaged in economic exploitation and denial of right to freedom, denial of right to equality, denial of various other rights in political sense. The destruction of industries, destruction of small scale domestic industries, destruction of the knowledge system. British Raj to some extent created a system, an ecosystem, which ultimately prevailed for more than 2 centuries. And it was Indian National Congress. In the last segment, the last lecture also, we tried to understand that what was modern nationalism all about and why nationalism as an ideology may not be very exclusive ideology. There has to be something of compositeness in diverse society and also common issues. Now, the common enemy, the common issue, the common problem has already been identified by socio-religious reformers, but they are also not leaving the chance to make an attempt to reform through British Raj by bringing into demands reforms on social customs which cannot be justified on the ground of equality or liberty, and especially in the context of women. But when Indian National Congress took up, the very unifying factor became the issue of poverty. The very robust economic critique of colonialism has been already been there, starting from various movements, whether it was people's uprising or civil uprising, to tribal resurgence, to military revolt. It was ultimately the heavy taxation policy in the form of economic policy which was resulting into resentment against colonial masters. In this lecture, we will try to deal one by one with all these issues and also leaders and scholars who dealt with this question and how they critique, how they provide a critique of colonialism from economic perspective. Now let us see the how Indian national movement, in a way, particularly from the establishment of the Indian National Congress, the early leaders who wanted to remain in the domain of democratic setup, and they did not want to venture into any attempt of overthrowing the British Raj by sheer force. Instead, very moderately trying to provide from the language of the masters that what their policies are has a loophole. And this economic critique, in a way, were disseminated through various newspapers, pamphlets, speeches, which ultimately provided a national consciousness, and the agitations, uh, the protests or strikes were not limited to metropolitan cities like Bombay, Madras, and Bengal, but it expanded, it spread all across India, and Indians by and large supported the very cause, getting convinced with this idea or theory of economic critique. Now, let us also see, um, that on the screen, this is the picture of the meeting, the very first meeting in 1885 of the first Indian National Congress. If you can see on the screen, and also in the last lecture I was talking about that there were majority Hindus with very few numbers of minorities like Muslims, Parsis, Sikhs or Jews. The constitution of Indian National Congress, in that sense, starting with the establishment, were of the majority population. But majority population with a liberal orientation, which ultimately, in a way, incorporated into its fold various minority voices. Behind its establishment, as we know that, and all sort of in the last lecture talking about, was it a conspiracy? Was it a safety valve? What was Indian National Congress altogether? Was it the establishment of Indian National Congress to release the discontent of Indians? We dealt with these questions in the last lecture. So, this is the original picture of Indian National Congress first meeting in 1885. Now, let's move to that economic critique. So, Indian intellectuals, they had optimism, they had hope that because that what is happening in the Europe in the form of modernity, industrial revolution will trickle down to the colonies. So intellectuals had this hope of a spiraling effect, that the spillover of the resources might happen to the colonies, and the setup of industries or modern sciences, technology, and all those things will be introduced in India as well. So these early intellectuals, they in a way did not oppose in true sense, believing that British rule will modernize India by introducing various reforms on one hand, but also in a very tangible sense, creating a base where Indians will be able to benefit the fruit of development. They expected that, all these values or the byproducts of the European Enlightenment will be available to their dispensation, which in a way did not happen. So, when the hope gets shattered, quite naturally, people, resort to all sort of radical manifestation by voicing their grievances, and that creates a kind of disillusionment, and that disillusionment in a way was percolating to the level of not only urban centers but also rural areas. And this disillusionment was only because of the fact that the British rulers did not meet the expectations, the hope of rebuilding, reconstruction of India by introducing all sort of technology, industry, and modern sciences. And in a way, if at all there was progress, there was very meager progress. The progress was very slow, and instead of the per capita income or other kind of development indicators, India started doing very poor, started becoming underdeveloping. The trends were very regressive and it was not in favor of India. And that in a way led the leaders to question the very impact of British rule on India. because the intention, the intent to rule was now exposed, and it was to the fore to everyone that British Raj, which has stayed in tandem with the rule of the company, has become a big empire only because of the exploitation of colonies, and nothing new is going to happen. Instead, India will become poor and poor. So, the very hope, the very support to the British rule in a way got shifted, and nationalism, the ideology which binds those leaders, they started galvanizing support among themselves against British rule. Now, who were the pioneers of economic analysis? If we see, the you know grand old man of India, who is known as Dadabhai Nauroji, gave his own theory. We'll come to that in the later part. Nauroji came with the theory of the poverty, estimation of poverty. And for Nauroji, the cause of poverty was basically exploitation, indeed, but also the very cause of poverty was drain of wealth. And this theory, in a way, convinced the nationalist leaders that there is indeed a drain of wealth by the British masters, and there is, exploitation which is happening on the ground, and one need to look into these questions. Now you have someone called M.G. Ranade, and we talked about his activities in the last lecture. And starting from Pratna Samaj to various activities, Ranade indeed was the advocate of industrial development. And then we have Romesh Chandra Dutt, who wrote the economic history of India by highlighting various lacuna and by calculating the amount of wealth which has been drained, which has been taken away from India to build industries in United Kingdom. And then we have G. Subramanya Iyer, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, P.C. Ray, G.V. Joshi, and others, who in their own fashion, in their own way, understood the economic exploitation and tried to understand the very cause of poverty and other related issues. Now on the screen, from left to the right, we have the grand old man of India, Dadabhai Nauroji. You have Romesh Chandra Dutt in middle, and you have someone called Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Now let us see, uh, to my surprise, it's Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Yes. Now let us see that how this colonialism's economic exploitation was in fact understood. Now leaders, they trace the process of colonization in trade, industry and finance. They identified the very essence of British imperialism, like subordination of Indian economy to the British economy. And they also noted the transformation of India into a supplier of raw materials, which I have been, dwelling upon these matter of facts, how India provided raw material for a market, for British goods, and ultimately India, instead of becoming a production house, became a market where British goods were sold to the Indians. So also how early nationalist leaders, they started advocating for cutting off economic subservience and pushing for an independent economic path. And the emphasis they gave was on the bold and powerful language used in their agitation, and of course, because of the introduction of the vernacular press, because of the various newspapers in the language of the masses were introduced. All these communications were reaching to those people, and ultimately they got the understanding of this colonial exploitation. So as I said, that Nauroji in fact came up with this idea of that poverty is a catalyst for nationalist economic agitation. Poverty can play a role of catalyst. And Nauroji continuously wrote about impoverishment and exhaustion of India by estimation of poverty, how annually Indians do not have more than 30 rupees in their hand is an evidence to say, contrary to various other European countries or the developed nations or the colonial masters, India's condition, India's per capita income per annum is something that which dehumanizes the very population of India. And this actually led to starvation, famine, and dire condition because of the insufficient food available to people. People were dying because of hunger. And this was something, I mean, this was in a way not something new for people of India, because people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy already advocated for the right to self-determination of the Irish people, where back-to-back famine in Ireland, in fact, was very much in the general common sense, that it was rather a created famine, right? And that kind of things, that kind of plague or famine, which wiped out villages to villages, were in fact a very common and very general sort of phenomena. Now, early nationalists, if we see, they they saw poverty as man-made. It was created, it was constructed. It is not inherent, and attributed this particular kind of poverty to the economic causes. Economic causes are the main catalyst, main factor behind the poverty, and it is basically created. So, Naurozi, who became early pioneer in the study of colonialism and poverty, interconnected these two issues, these two problems, political and social problems. And he was convinced that the main reason behind poverty is the colonial rule that was draining the wealth and prosperity of India. Now, the theory, the which Nauroji propounded, is called drain of wealth theory in 1867, and the drain of wealth was the portion of India's wealth and economy that foreigners captured. Now, if you see that how poverty became a national issue and unifying force. Now, nationalists viewed poverty as a problem of increasing the productive capacity and energy of the people. Poverty, was seen as a hurdle to national development, and it was, the nationalist leaders who addressed it, and it became a broad national issue. Now, the economic development, particularly through modern industry, were considered by nationalist leaders as the primary goal. Now, Dadabhai Nauroji, through his book, uh, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, made the earliest, estimation of poverty line. Now, even in the post-independent India, if we see, many of the committees, especially if we see the Sain Gupta committee, uh, and many committees, right, who have come to define the per capita poverty line rather. Okay? What is poverty line? Right? I mean, we have a below poverty line, uh, things like that. So, Dadabhai Nauroji earlier, almost like 150 years ago, or even, more than that, came up with this idea of, estimating poverty line. In his book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. And Nauroji came up with this idea that the, poverty line is basically, it's a cost of a subsistence or minimum basic diet. Rice or flour, dal, mutton, vegetables, ghee, vegetable oil, and salt available to people will determine poverty line. And Nauroji estimated, that it's, if those people who are having below 35 rupees per year, that simply means that they are below poverty line. So that in a way, just imagine the amount of money during the time of the British rule, and especially 1867. One cannot imagine the value of money in terms of the 35 rupees would go to even uh, 30,000 rupees. Now, considering the fact, in a year, if you're having, say, lump sum, I, I'm not very sure about the conversion of money of 1867, in today's time. But let us assume that if 35 rupees per year means, say, 30,000 rupees, per year in our times. Now you just imagine that in our times, even people do not have 30,000 rupees per year. The situation of contemporary time, where we have instituted poverty in India, is ultimately connected with almost the phenomena which happened 100, 200 years ago of colonial exploitation. We can say that many of the contemporary problems has to do with British colonialism. Unlike the uh, Mughal Empire or various empires who were there as a matter of governance, were indeed taking care of these issues of poverty reduction and many other issues, but and development, of course. But British Raj was for exploitation and exploitation and exploitation and nothing else. So there is no rebuilding of industry and development, and there is only exploitation. Now, moving ahead with drain theory as a focal point, we see the drain theory emphasized the transfer of India's capital and wealth to Britain. Nauroji and others argued the drain was the fundamental evil of British rule and the cause of India's poverty. Drain theory integrated various threads of the nationalist critique, revealing the exploitative character of British rule. And this was the drain theory which got understood by leaders, nationalist leaders. They started in a way as a tool. The drain theory became a tool for political agitation against British imperialism, and it was easily understood by the masses that for every problem in terms of poverty is directly connected with the economic exploitation by the British imperialism. And also the contradiction between the Indian people and British imperialism was seen as insoluble without overthrowing British rule. And this, in fact, became a staple of nationalist political agitation, especially during the Gandhian era, after the advent of Gandhi. Also, demand for industrialization became a unifying force. Early nationalists unanimously advocated rapid development of modern industry. Industrialism, seen as a force to unite diverse regions and sections of Indian society. And industrialization was viewed as a means to create a common national identity with shared interests. Now, also, if there was demand for industrialization or there was critique of economic exploitation and poverty, one of the result of that economic exploitation, there was also opposition to foreign capital. The and this in a way was a very early socialist understanding in India, that early nationalists, they opposed the idea of relying on foreign capital for industrialization. They did saw that it is their money and they should actually build India without relying on any kind of foreign capital, because that will in a way make them indebted to the foreign rule, alien rule or British rule, and this will in a way pave the path for, even if there will be any kind of the what we may call it freedom or liberty, that connection itself will not be really the freedom or liberty. So they asserted that industrialization should be based on Indian capital to ensure genuine economic development. That was the idea. The idea that the very genuinity, because the British rule is not genuine towards industrialization. But they identified that there is certain kind of political consequences of foreign capital, because they argued that foreign capital actually led to political subjugation. Mind it that all the colonialism, the colonial exploitation, all these started with a foreign capital, introduction of foreign capital, by allowing the foreign companies to set up their industries, and in a way those companies then later on actually became a kind of administrative and political agencies, and they started kind of subjugating politically. So foreign capital created all sort of vested interests, demanding security, reinforcing foreign rule. So this was in a way a very conscious move, that warning against the influence of foreign capitalists in Indian politics, and the and also a potential threat to the Indian National Congress, because Indian National Congress, established by some of the British officers, may venture into this adventure of industrialization, and industrialization through foreign capital, which ultimately there will be no stopping. So yes, demand for industrialization is fine, but with whose money? And nationalist leader, in a way, they thought about it, that it will be only the Indian people's money, so that there will be genuine economic development. Now, in the matters of economic policies, there were foreign trade and railways. Now, nationalists, they criticize the changing pattern of foreign trade, and they emphasize the export of raw materials and import of manufactured goods. They saw that railways were in fact promoting commercialism and not industrial revolution, and in fact that actually led to underselling of domestic industrial products. British Raj in a way benefited a lot by constructing railways, and because it was easy to move raw materials from one place to another, and especially from port to port, or the from the places of the production of raw material to the port. And in a way, railways became a sort of channel of not only communication but also medium of exploitation. Now, there is opposition to free trade. If we see, not only foreign capital but also free trade, because free trade policies were blamed for ruining India's handicraft industries and subjecting emerging industries to unfair competition. And nationalist leaders, in a way, believed that British economic policies favored the British capitalist class. There's a strong criticism of the negative impact on Indian economy and development. Now, the colonial finance policies, like taxation policies, in fact, favored the rich, burdening the poor. Now, nationalist leaders, they started demanding for the reduction of land revenue and abolition of the salt tax. There was criticism of high military expenditure, which actually was serving imperial needs rather than development and welfare departments. Now, this is a undermining of the ideological hegemony of British rulers, where early nationalist leaders, in a way, started, speaking the all liberal, discourses in front of British ruler by showcasing them that there's a mismatch between that what we may call it the theory and practice, and in a way there is certain kind of degeneration while we talk about British rule in India, instead of talking about all philosophy of John Stuart Mill to John Locke to others. So and that, in a way, that ideological hegemony was undermined, and and particularly the very moral foundation of the British rule was shaken, and also any attempt of economic justification of British rule was rebutted by the nationalist leaders. Now, because British power relied in India, I mean, on both physical force and moral force, economic development was presented as a chief justification for British rule. But nationalists, they contested this, asserting that if it is so, then why poverty and why backwardness? And and because there was draining of India's resources, the drain theory highlighted the transfer of India's capital and wealth to Britain. Nationalists argued that British rule was exploitative, undermining the romance of beneficence claimed by the rulers. And of course, Dada Bhai Nauroji's this theory played a great role in unifying nationalist voices. And also, there was a bit of political disaffection, this economic agitation, which led to corrosion of faith in British rule's benevolent character. The rules, especially by the British, nationalist leaders, they linked the economic question with the politically subordinated status of India. And there is a gradual shift from demanding political power to advocating some form of self-government. And this actually became a seeds of nationalism, the very economic critique, and nationalist leaders, they did not rely on abstract sentiments, nationalism on a thorough understanding of the interest of Indian people. People demanded that there should be a transition from economic critique to the political demands of self-government, where again Dadabhai Nauroji became a prominent voice, and people demanded with nationalist leader that there should be mass struggle for political emancipation. Now, this in a way led to the firm foundation for national movement, and early nationalists sowed strong foundations for the late national, later national movement. They rooted nationalism in a scientific economic critique of colonialism. The themes of economic critique reverberated in later mass agitations and movements. And lastly, this entire gamut of understanding provided an unwavering anti-imperialism, where Indian nationalists did not waver in their anti-imperialism. The economic critique formed the basis for sustained resistance against imperial rule, and the nationalist movement in the 20th century built upon the enduring foundation laid by the early nationalists. So, with this segment, this lecture, we tried to understand the early leaders of the Indian National Congress, who tried to understand the very problem of India's subjugation under British rule through economic critique and linking economics with politics. And they showcased by understanding the India's problem very scientifically and logically that the disconnection, delinking of you know colonialism would only pave the way for liberation. So now we'll end here. Thank you so much. We'll start our next lecture in uh, you know we will try to understand the next part of the Indian National Congress in the next lecture. Thank you.